The state of the sports cards industry. This discussion is an exploration of the baseball card industry, the mechanics and mystique of the industry, and what many people might not be thinking about when they buy a card in the present day. I'm not a baseball card expert in the traditional sense, except that I've had baseball cards blanketing my life since basically birth. Uncles and aunts, grandparents and parents, who were collectors of more than a generation before me. They stoked the flame of the concept of the cardboard hobby. But the industry has changed. A lot. In a world where virtual reality is a legitimate promise and a smartphone exists in every child's pocket, a simple piece of cardboard doesn't have the same draw it once did. Not only is this lack of interest from the younger generation a problem for the longevity of the industry, but the changing styles of how adults interact with the baseball card hobby have presented a challenge to the collecting world, and this discussion is all about exploring those challenges. I am an expert in a few things, notably business management, marketing, and risk management. My entire adult career has been spent at the upper echelons of these industries, and I have respectable credibility in all of these fields. I'm also intimately familiar with the printing industry, the internet, and anything related to internet technology, and I'm a statistical analyst of some legitimate skill. Don't expect all the thoughts contained herein to be rainbows and butterflies, and don't expect it to be a micro-exploration about rampant fraud and ridiculous accepted practices in the sports card industry. There are a lot of people more closely associated with these topics who can speak more authoritatively than I can, as you could be listening to. As a note, we will talk about all cards, but we will mostly focus on baseball and baseball cards to make most points here. Mainly that's for the ease of understanding. Let's talk about retail sports cards. As a sort of catalyst, though I did mostly do it for research purposes, for this discussion, I purchased $100 worth of cards at retail in big box stores over the course of 3 separate days and in 3 separate cities in different brand name establishments. Altogether, I didn't expect much. I'm not even a fan of retail product. I much prefer hobby variants. What struck me, though, aside from the rampant card pack searching and the lack of interesting pack contents, was how expensive this quote-unquote hobby can be. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective in quite some time. $100 isn't what it used to be in the pack game. $6 to $7 jumbo packs and skeletonized, meager-looking offerings from other sub-brand names meant I would net about 300 cards deep. A stack of turds, really, relatively speaking. No hits of value. A few nice rookie cards with a current value of about $7 collectively, and only one card that was mildly interesting to me. What amounts to basically a second-year Saquon Barkley press proof from Donruss 2019 by Panini. I also got a second-year Baker Mayfield base card, and out of some baseball packs, I got 2 Justice Sheffield rookie cards that tipped the scales at a surprising $1 US, if I could actually get them to sell. You can see from the crudely filmed overhead video with bad lighting that I captured for some of the pack breaks, just to prove the point that retail cards are at worst dead and zombified, and at best a sham. What does any of this matter? For the price of entry and all the drawbacks, retail card pack purchasing sucks. That is, even if you buy sealed boxes at full price and the cards aren't thrashed from all the pack sniffing. Hobby dealers that get ruined by the industry. Note, I don't believe many of the dealers are much better than retail. With a good scale, say a $50 variety on Amazon, any dealer could weigh packs or even boxes and know after opening the extreme spread variant which box or pack weights denote hits, at least from a relics perspective. Hell, I've probably been complicit in buying searched packs for most of my life. We all kind of knew we weren't going to get that 1989 Upper Deck Pack Fresh Griffey Jr. card when we dropped $5.75 on the counter way back. You know, when it was a hot pack. Dealers know when hits have happened in their boxes. Dealers still have to sell the remaining crap to make a living. We're talking about feeding their families and paying their rent. In fact, it's a horrible quality of life being a dealer. You really must have some of that love of the game to be in normal retail dealing in the sports card business. Distributors, wholesales, and now big conglomerate buying channels are all going to get their cut before you do as a dealer. You're the low man on the totem pole and the lifeblood of the system at the same time. So what amounts to being the plankton to the whales of the industry is really kind of a crap deal. You get the privilege of buying cards at about the same price that your customers can buy them online from DA Cards or Blowout, but you also have to commit to carrying the crap that Topps or Panini wants to produce in the off-season that quite frankly sucks. More than that, your cost per square foot is considerably higher than the online guys or the warehouse guys. You have to spend hundreds of hours a month in engagement routines to maintain any kind of following locally, and you're bound to adhere to industry standard clauses, which seek to penalize you out of the game as fast and as often as possible. When was the last time you got an invite to an autograph signing for Aaron Judge? Or the draft pick party at the posh venue? Oh yeah, you didn't. But your distributor did. Just remember, you eat last. And that meal comes from the scraps that everyone above you leaves over, including those fly-by-night case breakers that make it next to impossible for you to get more than a case of good product each year. The monopolies that exist. Topps is the big offender here, though with last year's numbers now public, the contracts that the NFL and the NBA are getting from Panini and Donruss, Score, etc., are all bigger than what the Major League Baseball is getting from Topps, which is about $10 million. That's individually, not collectively, meaning there's an order of magnitude adjustment for the money the NBA and NFL are taking in comparative to the MLB. And yet, Topps is still the monopoly of the industry. It makes it hard for innovation to exist. And don't tell me Panini is innovative because they have 4+ different kinds of cracked ice parallels. That stuff looks like big hair from the 1980s to me. It needs to go, and quickly. Forget about simply a lack of innovation driven by lack of competition. There are bigger problems with the controlling few companies at the top of the industry. They act like a cartel to fix prices, fix distribution, and fix perceived value. They're all operating under the same guise that manufactured scarcity will equate to long-term value. It doesn't. They still produce hundreds of millions of pieces of cardboard each year. Sometimes the short prints are into the millions. That does not bode well for values in 30+ years. But that manufactured scarcity is good for business today. On to the next shiny object. That's the rallying cry from the top producers of sports cards, and we eagerly eat it up in the name of quote-unquote investment-grade memorabilia. A small amount of what comes out of the factories in the hobby amounts to either investment-grade or memorabilia, period. The psychology of sports cards. The companies know we can't help ourselves. The chance of something great like the kids had a generation or two before us, like that 1952 Mantle, and we can't control the urge to crack some wax. It's amazing to me that after an antitrust challenge that opened up the industry, followed by the worst era in Waxbox history, and with all the stipulations written into gambling regulations across the 50 states, that we haven't seen some sort of regulation on the way sports cards are marketed. Perhaps it's inevitable, because even with scammers shoving their bad deeds in our face constantly, we keep lining up to buy altered, manipulated, unrealistically high-priced cardboard that has proven to be a bad investment over the short term, and a simple, lucky purchase for investors who didn't know they were investing when they held on to their old cards, or their dads, or their grandpas, or their moms, or their grandmothers. We must accept the fact that if we let the companies guide us to the product through slick marketing and poor delivery with a bit of polish, that we'll be taken advantage of. It's a proven fact that you cannot polish a turd with any kind of sustained attempt. Let's stop polishing the turd that we're being handed by the powers that be and change the way the industry works. The gambling gene. Everyone has some vice or some weakness. For many people in the card collecting industry, it's the same one that governs the gambling gene. We simply can't help ourselves when given the opportunity to potentially see a big return on investment. But the odds are always in the house's favor. In the case of the gambling machines or the poker tables, you actually have better odds because the odds are fixed and reset regularly. With sports cards, the odds are fixed, but they never reset. So the cost basis for the companies is already built in. You never gain the upper hand. You never get the chance to beat the house. The house always wins. and they get to upcharge you for the pleasure of losing to them. It doesn't mean we don't get our temporary fix, but don't believe the lie that cracking wax is investing in future value. And always let it be remembered, historical returns are no guarantee of future success. In the case of sports cards, this has never been truer than it is right now, where the numbers are manipulated to give us perceived value, and nothing is as scarce as they make it out to be. Did you know that a baseball card made out of pure 24 karat gold would be worth about $100 US? The average card actually weighs less than 2 grams. Today there's a card of a player that will never play in the game again, played less than 50 games, and was not good enough to get on the roster. And because his autograph is on the card, it's only been produced 1 out of 1 for that colored border, and it's been graded a pristine 10 grade. It's selling for and getting bids at $1,500 US. There is little to no value for that card. I'd stick to the noble metals. Thank you very much. The crap that's coming out every year. Speaking of crap that has no value, what's coming out next? Oh look, it's the same thing as last year with a different border and a matte finish instead of a glossy UV coating. Wait, is that the same picture as last year? The quality of products in the industry is getting worse and worse. The quality control is declining too. But that's not so much the production company's fault. We're buying more than ever under the auspices of cards as an investment. Then we make it hard for the companies to keep up, so they can't hire and train skilled people on their lines quick enough to mitigate the quality control issues. From no other industry do we accept such lenient protocols as we do with the sports card industry. Nowhere else will you find people losing so much money over the long term without a class action lawsuit, a regulatory oversight commission, or an intervention. But we can hardly blame the companies. They are simply selling us a product that we're readily buying and not complaining about. The techniques used in the industry are old school for the most part, at least for larger print runs. There are still huge problems with off-centered cutting. How that's possible with today's technology escapes me. As a market, we don't mandate innovative product. We simply mandate more product. What we all know is that scarcity is what drives prices up, right? Then how can we clamor for more volume when less volume would be in our favor? What the industry lacks in innovation is subsidized by the glut of volume that the manufacturers produce year over year. At some point it will catch up to them, as too many of us will realize the bad hand we're being dealt from the factory. And guess what? The company will bend, at least temporarily, to our will, until we get complacent after they make a once-in-a-decade great release. This is the cat and mouse game that is the structure of our industry. It's all cyclical. We complained about junk wax, and they made inserts. We're eventually going to complain about inserts, and they'll make a new placebo. How case breaks could be ruining the hobby. So many cards are flooded onto the market that the temporary value of any special card is diluted so hideously that it will never recover. The hit culture is becoming the driving force of an ever-increasing product pricing mix, too. When some random guy on YouTube.com can break 45 cases of product a year and you can't get access to any of that because you didn't buy a slot fast enough, it takes away a lot of the fun. Furthermore, because people will cry a lot when they don't get their hit fix, there is most assuredly going to be an increase in hits, which at best is annoying and at worst long-term damaging to the industry in both an economic sense and an innovation sense. I'm not horribly angry with case breaks, and I think some of it is good for the industry because it stokes the desire to get involved, and it allows people to be casual or hardcore, or any shade in between the extremes. But case breaks do tax the industry heavily when it comes to how things get priced, what percentage of costs go to handling fees and shipping costs, and what product is available and to whom. It's not quite to the level right now that is devastating to the industry, but if the trends continue without other adequate outlets being brought to the forefront, the industry will experience some negative effects as a result of case breaking. Hits, hits, hits. Is a hit really a hit if it isn't great enough to keep, or it isn't cool enough to command a legitimate price upon liquidation? Majority of the hits are for sale within hours of opening the wax/foil. If the same hit will be produced in a substantially similar format in the next season of cards, is it really a hit worth owning? What's a hit anyways? Today, that could mean any number of things. It could be an unproven rookie that signed 500 cards and will never get called up to the show. It could be a relic jersey that only 998 other collectors got a piece of this year from that set also. It could be a one-of-a-kind signature or hair from a U.S. president that may be alive or may be dead. Did you know you can get documents of actual historical significance that are unmolested for less than most baseball cards with a cut signature costs? These have legitimate provenance too. Real signatures, not cut. Which item holds more long-term value, I would ask? Go ahead, take a guess. I already have the answer. Is it a hit if it's just the same picture, but it has a lime green border instead of a much, much more attractive black or white border? How about if it's a stamped piece of cardboard with a different logo on the top right corner? Whatever a hit used to be seems to have created legitimate value. What constitutes as a hit in today's sports card collecting realm is yet to prove it can create lasting value. Here's a hint at what has historically created value. Quality, preserved version of plain base set rookie cards and cards that show significant players with statistical and meaningful contributions to baseball and life. Scarcity that is not manufactured, and the story of the card, the player and the team, and the people who have been caught up in the whirlwind that can be one great season or a decades-long dynasty. That's what creates value. That's what constituted hits in the past. I'm not saying we should wholesale throw out the industry's changes, but maybe some pause for reflection would be advantageous as we evaluate what is really a hit of considerable or lasting value. And I don't even stipulate that it be from an economic perspective. The underpricing of cards because of catalysts that exist for card turnover. Most case break participants don't care about the 1 of 250 card they just pulled. They rarely care about the autographed rookie they got the randomized draw for either. They're just wanting to offload that card to help finance the next slot purchase in the ever-increasing slot cost case break world. They're chasing their own demons, perhaps, or they're at least chasing the thrill of the break. What does it matter? It's their card. Oh, it matters. That perceived dilution of value in the marketplace means anyone can own a special card by today's standards. More than that, it means that today's standard of value has eroded to the point where we can buy special cards that aren't even special at bargain basement prices. When was the last time you saw a relic card get a gem mint or similar grade from a professional third-party grading company? They aren't made to hold value. They're made to stoke interest in an otherwise unobtainable. And now that unobtainable bat from Tris Speaker can be had for $199 US and on more than one piece of cardboard. Guess what? Somewhere in the warehouse at one of Topps manufacturing plants, there lays a baseball bat that is still 98% complete, just waiting for the shock and awe to wear off of the current hobbyists so it can be carved down and whittled away into the next ubiquitous baseball card relic. Snore. Knowing that more can be and will be produced means collectors don't even value the cards that ostensibly should be special. Knowing that liquidating this card now means that a case break participant can grab another couple of slots in a case break for a chance at the 1 of 1 du jour means cards don't have any real value anymore because they're being gambled away for the sake of a chance. Supply is never going to be rare enough to command legitimate prices in the future. Remember junk wax? Anyone who grew up within a shout of the second half of the 1980s or any of the 1990s remembers how much they spent on crack and wax and how worthless these cards generally are. Even though game legends like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, those guys deserve a whole other explanation, and Ken Griffey Jr., Cal Ripken Jr., Tony Gwynn, and Nolan Ryan played during that era. The statistics from these players alone are either at or near the top of baseball's all-time records. Each of them made a nice home in wax from the 1980s to the 1990s and the surrounding years. The only player in that group whose cards were difficult to obtain across the entire breadth of their career was the workhorse Nolan Ryan, whose career spanned multiple decades. Even then, only his rookie cards represented a difficulty in obtaining. There were millions of copies of each card produced, and no one company holding back. There was barely a hint of limited production in the card company executives' minds. But that's a misnomer of sorts. Sure, the junk wax era was an egregious offender when it comes to the ridiculous production numbers, but that doesn't mean that in today's world of one of ones that all these problems have been solved. Manipulated scarcity. Everything is numbered nowadays. You have parallels upon parallels. There are some beautiful cards available, no question. But a one of one card basically means nothing now. Sure, you can find a sliver of a bat from Shoeless Joe Jackson's famous Black Betsy or a reasonable facsimile on a card, and for a season you will have the rarest card in history, until Topps releases another one the next year as a parallel in an Allen and Ginter hobby case, or 36. And the same way the Fed can manipulate the money supply, Topps, Panini, Donruss, and others can manipulate the card supply and dilute the current market just by continuing to release new cards with similar manufactured values built in. All this leads to coveted prizes that have a shelf life of only a year or two. More and more, shinier and shinier cards are needed to satiate the people who didn't pull the card on, say, a quasi-legal internet Raz or in even a more legitimate break session. It's out of control. When you can get the same picture on the card with 24 different colored borders, it gets boring, and it dilutes the overall pool of cards. They aren't inherently more valuable just because they have a numbered stamp. They're simply presented to the market that way. Everyone can get one. If you can't get the purple parallel, get the pink. If you don't like the pink, get the orange. It's ridiculous. Sure, they may have only produced one of them, but guess what? One-offs are likely not printed on old-fashioned machines with multiple printing plates and multiple passes. They are likely produced on state-of-the-art digital presses like the HP Indigo 12,000. What would you do if you knew that a disgruntled Topps employee could print a whole sheet of Bowman, Mike Trout rookie card chrome refractor cards and fake the signatures on it? And now your 1 of 500 is more like 1 of 572 with zero chance of selling. Not to mention now the authentication can be called into question because the signatures aren't legitimate. Or is that due to the value of your card now? For that matter, a nobody who works for a decently sized printing operation with a digital press, who even understands just a tiny bit about printing, could run off sheets of nearly perfect, foil-enhanced 2011 Topps update numbered US 175 Mike Trout cards just like Topps did in 2010 and 2011 in minutes on a capable digital press like that. With the laser-guided cutting machine that's in the same shop, by the way, these presses can also cut, they don't need a separate machine, they would have a slew of Gem Mint PSA 10s or BGS 10 black labels in less than a few hours worth of work. The point is this, for modern era cards, fakes are rampant. It's not just fake grading labels, the cards can be reproduced in minutes to pixel perfect. This is mostly a discussion about production volume and not fake cards, but the point remains, the manipulation of the market exists, and it's from both bad actors and the hobby monopolies themselves. Just how many Mike Trouts did Topps print in the 2011 update set? It sure seems like a lot of PSA 10 examples exist on the market. Were there more than 100,000? 200,000? 10 million? Would we even be able to verify the number that Topps claimed they printed? Here's the bottom line. Your one of one isn't a one of one forever. Not to mention there is a lot of room for error or illegal behavior from a lot of different entities. Will it hold value for the long term, or are you just being manipulated into thinking it's scarce or valuable or both? You can get a Hall of Fame Negro League Stars autograph on a traceable, well-documented artifact for less than $100. If Topps or Panini produces a cut auto card with that same person's signature, all of a sudden it's $350 to $575 on eBay. It looks worse, it has less value because it's a cut signature, and it has less authenticity than the other autograph. But we're fooled into believing it has the same value, and more often than not, more value. Check out other similar comparisons. You'll be shocked at what you find. This is not a simple one-off, pardon the pun, anecdotal reference. Manipulated scarcity. Everything is numbered nowadays. You have parallels upon parallels. There are some beautiful cards available, no question. But a one of one card basically means nothing now. Sure, you can find a sliver of a bat from Shoeless Joe Jackson's famous Black Betsy or a reasonable facsimile on a card, and for a season you will have the rarest card in history, until Topps releases another one the next year as a parallel in an Allen and Ginter hobby case, or 36. And the same way the Fed can manipulate the money supply, Topps, Panini, Donruss, and others can manipulate the card supply and dilute the current market just by continuing to release new cards with similar manufactured values built in. All this leads to coveted prizes that have a shelf life of only a year or two. More and more, shinier and shinier cards are needed to satiate the people who didn't pull the card on, say, a quasi-legal internet Raz or in even a more legitimate break session. It's out of control. When you can get the same picture on the card with 24 different colored borders, it gets boring, and it dilutes the overall pool of cards. They aren't inherently more valuable just because they have a numbered stamp. They're simply presented to the market that way. Everyone can get one. If you can't get the purple parallel, get the pink. If you don't like the pink, get the orange. It's ridiculous. Sure, they may have only produced one of them, but guess what? One-offs are likely not printed on old-fashioned machines with multiple printing plates and multiple passes. They are likely produced on state-of-the-art digital presses like the HP Indigo 12,000. What would you do if you knew that a disgruntled Topps employee could print a whole sheet of Bowman, Mike Trout rookie card chrome refractor cards and fake the signatures on it? And now your 1 of 500 is more like 1 of 572 with zero chance of selling. Not to mention now the authentication can be called into question because the signatures aren't legitimate. What does that do to the value of your card now? For that matter, a nobody who works for a decently sized printing operation with a digital press, who even understands just a tiny bit about printing, could run off sheets of nearly perfect, foil-enhanced 2011 Topps update numbered US 175 Mike Trout cards just like Topps did in 2010 and 2011 in minutes on a capable digital press like that. With the laser-guided cutting machine that's in the same shop, by the way, these presses can also cut, they don't need a separate machine, they would have a slew of Gem Mint PSA 10s or BGS 10 black labels in less than a few hours worth of work. The point is this, for modern era cards, fakes are rampant. It's not just fake grading labels. The cards can be reproduced in minutes to pixel perfect. This is mostly a discussion about production volume and not fake cards, but the point remains. The manipulation of the market exists, and it's from both bad actors and the hobby monopolies themselves. Just how many Mike Trouts did Topps print in the 2011 update set? It sure seems like a lot of PSA 10 examples exist on the market. Were there more than 100,000? 200,000? 10 million? Would we even be able to verify the number that Topps claimed they printed? Here's the bottom line. Your 1 of 1 isn't a 1 of 1 forever. Not to mention there is a lot of room for error or illegal behavior from a lot of different entities. Will it hold value for the long term, or are you just being manipulated into thinking it's scarce or valuable or both? You can get a Hall of Fame Negro League Stars autograph on a traceable, well-documented artifact for less than $100. If Topps or Panini produces a cut auto card with that same person's signature, all of a sudden it's $350 to $575 on eBay. It looks worse, it has less value because it's a cut signature, and it has less authenticity than the other autograph. But we're fooled into believing it has the same value, and more often than not, more value. Check out other similar comparisons. You'll be shocked at what you find. This is not a simple one-off, pardon the pun, anecdotal reference. The cards are in horrible condition from factory. With all the hits that are coming in every box and the overzealous use of die cutting, chrome, foil stamping, UV treatments, ridiculous paper stocks, laminated card layering, and other shenanigans, the cards are coming out of factory with creases, dinged edges, glue discolorations, die press indentions, and flakes or even surface defects. What's the point of such an amazing hit if it doesn't come from factory in an investment-grade condition? Forget about the 37 other color variations that are numbered out of 999. This is just a ridiculous way to treat such a precious piece of memorabilia. Could you imagine getting a Ty Cobb bat grip end cap and then realizing it's enshrined in a circle of cardboard, and then the circle within a circle layout is off-centered and not even of the same circular angle, one more closely resembling a poorly drawn oval? Sure, there's a whole discussion about murdering a baseball bat from one of the greatest hitters in baseball history, from which only a few dozen bats probably still even exist, but that's outside the scope of this discussion. At least it's outside the scope of this discussion if you want a legitimate, unbiased, and comprehensive discussion about it. Pull out the last hit you got in a pack and look how bad it is on the edges or around any die cut portion. I consult at a very high level to dozens of industry-leading printing companies from a business management and marketing perspective. I'm not an amateur at understanding how the process works. There are ways to minimize defects at the factory if you want to. I'll undertake a different discussion on this topic another time. If we put such a premium on PSA and BGS and Beckett, etc. grading, why are we okay with such ridiculous lack of quality control from factory? We're talking about cards that, from a scarcity perspective, are supposed to rival the 1952 Mantle and the two T206 Honus Wagner, cards that are 67 years and 110 years old, respectively, in 2019. It should be pointed out that Honus Wagner card is between 60 and 100 existing examples in 2019. Many cards nowadays are one of ones. I'll be the first to state that Mike Trout, this generation's greatest active player talent, will not have a card worth $3+ million in the year 21-29. As much as I love Mike Trout, at least it won't be the equivalent of $3 million in today's value, a figure of which the Wagner would likely fetch nearly double today if the right specimen went to auction, even in the midst of the Bill Mastro trimming scandal surrounding the most expensive specimen ever sold. Yet, a one-of-one card should easily command such a price if the talent on that card were anywhere near Mr. Wagner's capabilities and had similar stats, especially given the technology improvements and the huge glass security cases we store even our least expensive graded cards in. The equation simply doesn't add up. You aren't going to see this type of rarity, one of one for example, command the same types of prices, even though they're 60 times rarer and in much better condition than the Honus Wagner T206 card. That said, the cards aren't coming from factory fresh packs in pristine condition because they're overwrought, underdesigned, and poorly monitored on the production line. Relic cards aren't very interesting anymore. How many Chris Bryant shirt swatches can one collector own? No disrespect to Bryant, most of these cards are dinged on the corners. The jersey is usually only event worn, or if it's game worn, it's a game that Bryant went 0 for 5 in and has no historical significance. Boring. The more case breaks I see with enthusiastic presenters championing the same card they hooted and hollered about 3 weeks prior, the more I'm convinced that play acting has more control over the value of cards that are pulled than the actual card itself. The stuff coming out of the ubiquitous case breaks is mostly uninspiring. Why auto cards don't have the same staying power that clean base cards will always have. If you're buying a card 50 years after the year it was printed, you want it in as original condition as you can get it in. Go to 100 years and it's even more important. Would you trust a signed Honus Wagner card without a picture of him signing it? We're not even sure he wanted his T206 cards out there, whether from contract dispute or the desire to keep kids off of tobacco. The point is, even if they're factory authenticated, will Topps even be in the business 100 years from now? Who knows? Will Panini be in the business in 2119? They probably have less of a shot than Topps has. The point is, base cards show what's real and provable by the history books. It also doesn't bring a second-hand collector into the life of the previous collector any more than it has to. The simple card in good condition is what creates a lasting affinity towards that player/cardboard, not some signature that may have been faked to get a few more dollars. What about the rumors of a Dak Prescott auto pin signature from Panini made by a machine? Autographs simply don't have the staying power on cards. It makes one wonder, will that Mike Trout parallel from Bowman have the same value as an untouched card from the base set in the future? Even if you can prove autograph provenance, it may not be as desirable to the second or third or 10th buyer of the card as it was to the first, or the person who got the signature. I'm not saying that auto cards aren't cool, just that many times they don't hold a legitimate top spot in the hobby historically. Get that autograph on a ball, or a game-used bat, or a jersey, and that's a different story, especially with authentication. Parallel cards. Blah, blah, blah. We've said it before, we will say it again. It's cool to get some different flavors in your packs, but when the quasi-hits outnumber the base cards, it starts to get annoying. What about pink versions of your favorite player? Does that mean that instead of a 1 out of 100, now with 9 different colors, it's 1 out of 900 or worse? It's a bit ridiculous to keep up. Why does every single thing have to have metallized plastic coating on it? Can't something just look great as a matter of design? Now we have to resort to every cheap trick in the printing industry to hide poor photography or lack of creativity by design teams. Die cut something and all of a sudden it has more value? Just because something looks like it smells like pine trees and could hang from a rearview mirror doesn't mean the average collector wants it. It's getting old. Remember other fads that came and went? Yeah, wood paneling on your kitchen walls was only cool for about 12 years in the 1970s and 1980s. See anyone with that style now? The same will be true for the glut of parallel cards on the market now, especially the ones that have no innovation and no legitimate value. What about this? Every player gets a 12 deep parallel set now? I don't want my commons having uncommon value. I want my stars and my rookie future stars having uncommon value. If every common player who can't get above the Mendoza line in batting average has the same intrinsic value due to perceived scarcity of their card in some purple retrofractor optical illusion parallel, what's the point? There are auto one-of-one cards going for thousands, depicting players who couldn't hack it in the major leagues and are back in minor league ball, where they will likely retire. I'm not saying to give up on them getting to the show. I'm saying sometimes value is driven by stats and skill and finding the right combination of luck and talent and at the right time. It should never, ever be solely driven by the number of cards a company claims to have produced. The Mike Trout effect. Mike Trout is the generational talent in baseball. Tom Brady, LeBron James, maybe all of these guys are candidates for the greatest of all time after their careers too. They're all significant drivers of the value of rookie cards, but every rookie of the year does not a Mike Trout become. Look at Aaron Judge. His sophomore slump hurts just looking. Who remembers Chris Coughlin, National League Rookie of the Year 2019? What about Giovanni Soto, National League Rookie of the Year 2008? Or Eric Hinsky, AL Rookie of the Year 2002? Or Jerome Walton, National League Rookie of the Year 1989? I think the point's been made. These guys were fine talents for several months, and their cards shot through the roof when they won the Rookie of the Year award, many before they even got hot. But they all couldn't keep their heads above water for very long in the major leagues. Guys like Mike Trout give hope to collectors. The sensation that makes good on his promise. Did you know that Mike Trout was the only draft pick who went to the live television draft presentation the year he was drafted? It was painful to watch him go so low in the draft, given his talent even then at the time before he was proven in the Major League Baseball. So many players will never make good on their promise, and millions of dollars will change hands in the sports card industry off the backs of their great 4-month-long runs in the majors. Mike Trout deserves his salary and his sports card notoriety, no question, but it's also clear that one great generational talent does not a successful hobby market make. What about baseball? Major League Baseball. Baseball has its own set of problems. Here are a few. The way that Hall of Fame inductees are chosen is flawed and harkens back to the shady underbelly of baseball, like the backroom dealings that perhaps forever disincluded one of the greatest players of all time, Shoeless Joe Jackson. You cannot share a video of Major League Baseball without the permission. There are few, if any, vocal viral stars that are baseball players. In this attention deficit disorder kind of world we live in, baseball seems like it goes on forever. Note, I love the time unrestricted quality that any given game has potentially. Performance enhancing drugs are still a stain on the game. Major League Baseball doesn't market as well as the NFL or the NBA or the UFC. The draft system sucks. Owners have too much power. Minor leaguers are treated like second-class citizens. Topps is the only company that has a contract to produce licensed images and produce a legitimate product with logos, and they're one of the least innovative companies producing cardboard. This isn't a broader discussion about baseball, but it is affected by baseball, and that's why these little nuggets will be left right here. Topps Now is almost a great idea. The concept of Topps Now is awesome. The execution leaves a lot to be desired. Will anyone care or ascribe value to the so-called Toronto Blue Jays team record 8th straight game with a double card that was produced by Topps this week with Bo Bichette on the front in 100 years? Not likely. But Collectors are paying premium prices for something that costs less than a fraction of a penny on a state-of-the-art digital press like the ones Topps is using to make the cards. With the potential for an on-demand print service for cardboard, you'd think that Topps would hire someone with an inkling of understanding about marketing or innovative design to consult them on how to roll it out more effectively to the market. Topps, I'm a consultant who understands biz dev, printing, baseball, the sports cards hobby collecting industry, and have worked with Fortune 100 companies in the past. Let me know if you want to hire a top tier consultant to help you improve this one of a kind offering. You almost got it right. Bo Bichette, Fernando Tatis Jr., Patrick Mahomes II. What do second generation emerging stars mean for the industry? Speaking of Bo Bichette, this kid is on a tear. I hope he continues. I hope he has a better career than his father. I really liked Dante in the latter end of the jump wax era and the years that followed. Fernando Tatis Jr., easily the best Rookie of the Year candidate, will likely be snubbed because of the small market team he plays for and because, home runs. Pete Alonso is good, but he isn't nearly as consistent or talented as Tatis Jr. at this stage in the season. Judging by first appearances, if Tatis doesn't win the Rookie of the Year, then it's business as usual, and that's baseball's and the hobby's biggest problem. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. How long will we as fans tolerate the ridiculous legacy unions that drive the direction of the game and the hobby with near impunity? I have nothing against Topps. In fact, I recognize them correctly as the only company whose cards in this era will have lasting value pinned to them thanks to their contracts with Major League Baseball. But it's tiresome to see a lack of innovation, ridiculous unnecessary printing techniques, poor quality control, and a complete monopoly in the cardboard sector. They can do better. Long-term holding. What does it look like in 2019 and beyond? Panini and Donruss, basically a subsidiary of Panini, and others will not have lasting value because they're creating year-by-year fad cards, trading in faux manipulated value. They can't even show the team the players are on. Not their fault, they were basically outbid by the elephant in the room. Plainly, though, if you cannot even place a team logo on the card, what is the value of that player later on? There's no cohesion, no flow to the card. A lack of an official license, no matter how annoying MLB can be, means that it's essentially an asterisk on the historicity of the card. One of one or not, Topps cards will hold value 100 years from now. Panini cards will just be shoddily put together, laminated cardstock holders of a 1.5-inch square of jersey fabric for the guy who you never saw play a game in person. It's not even a jab at Panini. There are real changes needed in the industry. We need innovation, security, protection, new ideas, new implementations, crossover marketing that excites a new generation of collectors into building out the next iteration of the hobby. With Topps being the only provider and Panini putting out legions of crap product to try and keep up with the proverbial Joneses, it's going downhill on a slippery slope. Who holds cards for 100 years anymore? What will be the point if the next generation doesn't care what those relics of the past are? Revolution is needed, and who will be willing to stand up and bring it? All cards of every era are at risk of losing value if people don't have any interest in the product year after year. You can say I'm full of crap for saying that, as the industry by volume of cash influx is at an all-time high. But the point I'm trying to make is this. Baseball cards became acceptable vehicles for consideration of investment because they weren't investment vehicles, and they still gained and held value. The same is not going to be true in the reverse. If the cards are not enjoyed like they once were, we are only a generation or two from losing all the card value that ever existed. They will cease to be worthy of investment dollars because no one will care enough to buy them, no matter how rare they are. Something must be interesting to be valuable in a broad spectrum perspective. Baseball cards are starting to lose a lot of their generational carryover appeal, and that hurts the industry. Consumers who aren't fully engaged are going to get burned. People who think they can grab a few bucks by buying the hot items now and holding on to them are in for a rude awakening. Something must have actual scarcity to be scarce and have its value proportionally increased by said scarcity. The scarcity is manufactured and daily at risk by the whims of the company who made the cards. If they want to release another card parallel series that makes your one of one just one of many, they can. If they want to print more than they originally printed, it's simply a matter of making more on their printing presses. The dealers will see their demise coming. The smart ones will get out long before it happens. The institutional buyers will also be ahead of the curve. See what I did there? It's the casual collector who thinks they have a shot at real value or even real enjoyment that will be out of luck. If you aren't paying really close attention, you can easily get burned. And stop buying things purely for investment reasons. Guess what? At least 3 of the top grading companies are under pressure now for their parts and scandals, their lack of oversight, or their blatant lack of value add. There are only 3 top grading companies. Let that sink in. The founder of the largest grading company in the world is selling what amounts to basically his entire collection of cards, which has the most impressive set of grades associated with any cards of their type. Can you say conflict of interest? Get this, the same company is under pressure by industry talking heads and could be potentially subpoenaed by the FBI thanks to recent card fraud. That's not to say they were complicit and or guilty of or with anything, but it certainly raises an eyebrow. 20 plus household names are under investigation with the recent hobby fraud rampant and being looked at by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That's a real thing. Prices haven't dropped. People are still buying like crazy. Even as some of the biggest auction companies are being scrutinized by federal investigators, the hobby thrives. How many of these situations will the industry be able to absorb before it becomes irreparably damaged? Investment quality cardboard. What investment quality cardboard? Very few of the items coming out of the factory is investment grade. Sure, Topps Transcendent is gorgeous, but mostly flash and serial numbers. There's scarcity, but it's manufactured. It's not organic. What's organic scarcity? That's when, for example, the kids of an entire generation loved their players so much that they would take a pack fresh Mickey Mantle 1952 short print and put it in the spokes of their bike or put it in their pocket to show their friends, such that the relative scarcity of that exact card is increased day by day and only a handful of mint condition cards still exist. Scarcity is when players had a say in what could be done on cards with their likeness, and they opposed the system, like when Honus Wagner allegedly stopped his T206 card from being marketed because he didn't like the idea of kids smoking. Who knows what's true? He may have wanted more money. Mr. Wagner never gave up his cigars. Either way, only a relative handful of T206 Honus Wagner cards exist today. It's the holy grail of card collecting. Scarcity is when a short print was necessary because so many of the first print run cards had gone out of factory before the team signed its latest phenom to a professional contractor, called him up from the minor leagues. The card company had to scramble to distribute the card to the masses. That simply doesn't happen nowadays. There are Max Scherzer cards, for instance, that existed while he was still an amateur. Chipper Jones had a dozen of cards that show him in street clothes or on non-MLB teams. The card producers simply print every rookie that anyone who is anyone has ever heard of, and then they have their bases covered. I know, again with the puns. So I'll ask again, what is investment grade cardboard? Maybe Mike Trout base cards? That's one of the few recent examples that makes sense. He's a proven player that's already challenging records long held by established Hall of Fame caliber players. His base card is clean, simple, good-looking card that came at the right time and in the right set. But there are thousands of them available, many thousands of pristine, graded variants, and they're likely overvalued relative to peers. What happens if Mike Trout, God forbid, has a career-ending injury next year? That built-in speculative value will drop like a rock in water. Note, I believe that Mike Trout's already a Hall of Fame candidate at this stage in his career, but the fact remains that anything could happen. Mr. Trout is the most consistent player in recent memory from a stat building perspective, but if he stopped playing tomorrow, would his cards command the thousands they command today? One card's listed and expected to get 400,000 USD at an auction. His regular base rookie card goes for more than 850 USD regularly in gem mint condition. Hall of Fame players from pre-junk wax era are also good investments in the relative sense, but that's the point of the discussion. Baseball cards are no kind of investment in the current market environment because pricing fluctuates too much. There aren't enough third-party companies who can challenge industry standards, and the grading companies drive too much of the value of cards without proportional value added. You can buy a card from the rookie year of the last player to hit for the Triple Crown for under $250 right now in pristine condition. Miguel Cabrera is undervalued, but not because he's not worth the money, rather because he was dealt a bad hand when it comes to the cardboard part of the hobby equation. Some of Cabrera's stats dwarf Mike Trout's stats, especially when you leave WAR and OBP OPS out of the mix, but Cabrera's cardboard value is a fraction of what Trout's is. Cabrera was arguably nearly as consistent as Trout has been, but Trout has played less than half the amount of seasons as Miguel Cabrera, 9 years compared to Cabrera's 17. All things even, the bet is better to buy the Cabrera card than to buy the Trout card, if for no other reason than that Cabrera costs much less. It's probably about the same volume of production quantity, and Cabrera is nearing the end of his career. Now, if Trout continues on with his on-field production, he will eventually rightfully dwarf Cabrera's stats in WAR, which is currently he's leading in anyway. But Trout will need to last several, if not many, more years at peak performance levels. But that's not how cardboard works. The market wants what the market thinks is hot. Rationale over the long term doesn't necessarily matter. So how can you gauge investment quality for cards? In a number of ways, and all of which require many more discussions way outside the scope of this one. Suffice it to say that what makes a Hall of Famer's career timeless will eventually be very similar to what makes cardboard of that Hall of Famer timeless. Did you know that Don Mattingly has similar career stats to Hank Greenberg, the legendary Tigers first baseman? Mattingly had legion more hits than Greenberg, and yes, Greenberg had more RBIs, home runs, and slugging percentage, but Mattingly is barely considered Hall of Fame caliber, despite all the love many kids born in the 80s and Yankees fans give him. In hindsight, Greenberg was an obvious choice, though it did take him 9 ballots to get in. Greenberg's rookie card commands $2,000 to $2,500 for his 1934 Gaudy card in, say, a 5.5 or a 6 grade or equivalent. Mattingly's rookie card, the Donruss 1984, will similarly fetch over $1,300 on a good day, despite being much more available in a gem mint grade, and despite Mattingly's likely never being enshrined in Cooperstown. Those prices will go up for Mattingly, most likely, and Greenberg's card will likely level off for at least the next 15 years. And then, after all the people who are old enough to remember hearing stories about or seeing Hank Greenberg play are dead, who knows what his card values will be like. Such is the way that the fickle cardboard industry works. You never know what you're going to get. A fake economy? A fake ecosystem? It begs the question, is the baseball card world all made up of intangible inputs and unrealistic metrics that simply piggyback on real-world principles to give the illusion of credibility? Let's explore that concept. The real-world principles are supply and demand, market timing, liquidity, and scarcity. The idea that these principles govern the secondary marketplace and in some small way the original marketplace lends credence to that marketplace. But the original marketplace doesn't need these things to exist. The fact that you are buying a good that is being sold and that there is consideration, the equivalent of an equitable agreement from the buyer and in the example of baseball cards also by the seller, makes the transaction legitimate. It doesn't need the other factors that a secondary marketplace needs. For instance, the markets for public companies, the stock exchanges for example, require certain elements to make them credible, functional, and self-correcting. This is necessary because the public wouldn't otherwise be able to provide liquidity, settling of buys and sells, and a built-in leveling effect that dictates pricing using organic metrics. Secondary markets, like the one we buy and sell sports cards in, also require these things. The elements provide legitimacy to the mechanisms in place, and the mechanisms are set up to allow for self-fulfillment and sustainability. The problem is that there isn't a single marketplace, and each marketplace processes each input separately and with different weighting. An example, if eBay is a large seller of products and many of them happen to be baseball cards, then the way that that transaction occurs and the built-in pricing will be relevant to the platform. That is, if there are fees that are common, these fees on a macro level will be built into the selling prices, and they will dictate the common increase in value to compensate for the additional costs. However, if a group of people with a large Twitter following decides to set up a razzer, which is sort of a illegal raffle, decides that they want to help sell some exclusive cards, they will sell spots mostly equal or close to the total value of the card being raffled. If a card is worth $120 on a platform like eBay, the spots might be sold for $12 each with 10 open slots. The seller nets their money, but the artificial inputs which dictate an acceptable level of credibility come from a different equation. In the case of the Razor, if the slots are too expensive, the seller better rethink his pricing or they won't get their money and the card won't change hands. In the case of eBay, if the auction doesn't bid up high enough, the seller can cancel for any number of reasons, but the credibility of the marketplace remains because the inputs come from other sources outside of the buyer and seller. The sheer volume of available products that are similar or the same will help to dictate that the pricing is in line, and the seller will fail at receiving their money, the card will not change hands. Each platform has its qualifiers and the elements that lend credibility so that supply is able to populate the platform and liquidity can be achieved. There are hundreds of other platforms in the hobby of sports card collecting. Each one will need basic elements so they can be perceived as realistic marketplaces. The problem is that the same principles aren't necessary for the original market. But the producers of these cards, Reed, Top, Panini, Donruss, etc., they do a lot to encourage these elements to be present with the original sale of the cards. They get benefit from the fact that people who buy cards think that these elements should be present at the time of the original purchase. But instead of helping the hobby, it hurts it. When the secondary marketplace principles rule the original marketplace, the original producers are able to manipulate too heavily the pricing, the supply, availability, liquidity, and in turn, the demand. Because an investment scheme is popular in sports cards now, the buying public conflates the real-world principles they're familiar with upon the manipulated specific marketplace principles that they're being fed from the manufacturers and the secondary market, and the whole thing seems credible somehow. However, the manufacturers, aided by willing third parties who amp up credibility through things like grading, still retain too much control, and therefore they can manipulate the entire marketplace with things like production volume, sourcing of materials like jerseys for relic cards, perceived scarcity, factory pricing, etc. So for a product that costs roughly the same to produce today as it did 30 years ago, they're able to command prices that are 6 to 10 times as much for the same size wax box or case lot. This is especially relevant when you recognize the ability to amortize the relic material purchases, the autographs, and the printing costs over time, as they can do this over multiple years and they pay fixed production fees for things like autographs. In the case of this year, it's less than $15 million a year for all player-related aspects, paper, ink, design work, etc. Knowing what your fixed costs are as a printer, but not being held to the commodity pricing that most printers are locked into by the market, means that price manipulation drives the industry. They produce product that is a standard commodity in the most real sense, i.e. ink on paper, but they're not competing with their normal competition. They're competing only with themselves. How the real world affects the price of baseball cards or sports cards. Did you know that Joe DiMaggio was a fourth ballot Hall of Famer? Cy Young didn't get the nod until his second ballot. Rogers Hornsby was a fifth ballot Hall of Famer. Wow. The things you learn. What does that have to do with the price of tea in China, or for that matter, the real world affecting baseball card values? Perceived value is not only built in, but it enhances the price, inflating it when the mob mentality starts to kick in. So for an MVP season, the card value for a given player inflates by many-fold. A Rookie of the Year is even more pronounced. The idea that potential, unrealized, is a driving factor for price is just the beginning to the speculative price. When a rookie, who for a couple years in the minors has just been an occasional player with some talent, shows that they can go a whole year and outclass most other rookies, the speculative value of that player's career goes up significantly. Forget the fact that most rookies and a large percentage of Rookie of the Year winners will never make it to legitimate star status, let alone the pinnacle of baseball, the Hall of Fame. So what happens is that inflated price point will often last for years until people realize that the Rookie Year performance was not a realistic indicator of the value of the player's likeness on cardboard. After the sophomore slump, it takes another year or two to realize the potential of the player wasn't there. If the player manages to stay in the lineup, like, say, because they were second baseman or middle reliever and has just enough skill to keep others out of the lineup, then it's possible that the card will only gradually lose value over time. If the player gets demoted to the minors and doesn't come back up, then millions of dollars throughout the hobby are lost because of the hype that inflated the card in the first place. Anyone remember the Todd Van Poppels and the Greg Jeffries and the Sean Abners of the world? As a side note, it was exceptionally hard not to list multiple Mets players. They've made surprising amount of draft pick mistakes. Just like the way oil prices and Fed rates affect the overall market, simple factors can affect the secondary market of baseball cards. Unfortunately, the manufacturers have not developed or funded large programs to help mitigate negative impacts by baseball on the hobby at the original marketplace. I want to make it clear, while a lot of the commentary is aimed at the manufacturers in this discussion, I believe that the manufacturers do not owe the buying public a systemic safeguard to negate the impact of changes in the world of baseball on card prices. The point I was trying to make is that the resources and the capacity to do such a thing exist, and such a mechanism would likely help them to deliver longer term profits. Is the industry being passed along to the next generation? Delivering longer term profits is mostly what this discussion is about. Believe it or not, for as critical as I am of the industry, its major players, and the way things have been happening on the scandal front, I very much love the hobby and want to see it continue on and thrive. I'm also a relatively successful business management consultant who has a lot of clients in the marketing and printing sectors, and have been a player in the technology changeover that's happened in the past decade. I genuinely want to be a helpful critic in the process, even though it's unlikely that any of the major companies would hire a consultant like me to help them navigate the changes occurring in the industry, especially since I'm so vocal and critical of their work as of late. That said, I have had a major hand in big campaigns around the world for the sport of baseball, and there are plenty of great ideas for the industry up in this head of mine. At this point in the discussion, you either agree with that, or who knows? You've either listened or watched or read a very long time, so let me know what you think. What I'm getting at is there are always ways that the industry needs to be moving, but it isn't. Mostly the generational transfer isn't happening. I took my kids to the card shop this week, and my 15-year-old son couldn't be more bored. My 4-year-old daughter was happy to open 2 junk wax packs of 1989 Score and is cherishing the cards at certain times throughout the day, but hasn't quite got the momentum I was hoping for. There is still hope, of course, but for the most part the landscape has changed. What are the manufacturers doing to improve generational acceptance of the hobby? After all, the beneficiary of the generational transfer is the manufacturers themselves, and secondarily, we benefit as hobbyists because they stay in business. I'm not the only one, I'm sure, that thinks that companies are not doing nearly enough to increase hobby acceptance among the younger crowd. With as much opportunity as there exists to bridge that technology gap, on-demand printing is the only foray that has gotten any kind of traction. Huge costs of entry, poor campaigns, and generally adult marketing have all but neutered the chance for kids to get involved in the hobby. Lucky for us, the NBA and the NFL are doing their part to market to kids, and that may in fact save the hobby eventually. But it doesn't bode well for baseball. Major League Baseball really needs to get woke on how to effectively market to the younger generation. Long story short, don't count on Topps or Major League Baseball to make believers out of your kids. Take them out and help them to learn the hobby and see if it sparks in them the same interest that it did in you. Reminiscing about your youth. It's never going to be exactly the same for others as it was for you. Part of the brilliance of collecting is the intangible tangibility of the connection between you and the sport, or you and the players. More to the point, every connection is individual. I like the thrill of getting something hard to find. I get a high from a pack hit. I also rarely get hits. I opened over 20 packs this month so far, and I've netted a grand total of 1 hit, and it was a simple parallel. I would never make a profit from my card collecting obsession if I stick to crack and wax. Other collectors just want to complete sets. I find it tedious, and for anything other than pre-war, the sets are far too big and boring for me to ever attempt it on a modern set. Some people take the gambling concept a little bit further. They only like breaks. Some sports card collectors are only collecting their hometown team or individual players that had an impression on them. It's just different for everyone. What all of them realize inevitably is that it's about more than profit or investment or portfolio growth. For most collectors, it comes back to the bonds built in their youth. How non-business people keep getting crushed by the industry. The industry in the current frame of reference is much different than it once was. It's a business, not a hobby in the most basic sense. If you could handle taking losses and you don't mind overpaying for the privilege of being part of the hobby, you need change nothing. You'll be okay. If you're taking this hobby seriously, though, and you want to make money at it, you need to treat it like a business. You cannot expect to make a profit if you treat it like a hobby. Take the tax treatment of collecting industries. The worst possible spot you could be in is to be a hobbyist who collects and gets taxed on gains. If you're a business, you need to make a profit. Forget about tax write-offs. You need to have a profit motive, a legitimate plan to make long-term profits, and the ability to change directions in order to get to that point if it's not working. One of the biggest problems with the sports car collecting hobby is that it's seen as a hobby by so many. No one builds a brand. No one makes technology investments. No one takes the time and effort to build an audience. They rely on eBay or check out my cards or Amazon or some other platform that charges an arm and a leg in fees. When you are losing 20% off the top and you're getting poor pricing access because your volume isn't large enough, there's not a realistic chance of turning a profit. You have to remember that rational adults understand that business people need to make a profit. You don't have to make excuses, but you do have to make sure your customers know that they are customers. They can be friends too, but you have to make sure that when it comes to business, you're treating them the right way and they're treating you the right way. One other major issue is that the current trends in the industry are softening the dealer market. It makes your work harder to turn a profit. You need to be innovative, inclusive, and offer exceptional customer service. The pricing pressure is just one aspect of the problems you'll face as a dealer. But if you're coming into the business as a hobbyist who happened to have some good luck on an auction board or made some smart decisions, make sure you have a long-term game plan. Case breaking is a low profit margin endeavor. The laws are difficult surrounding the breaks, and relying on another platform to build your business means you aren't taking your own business as seriously as you need to. These are super basic concepts, but if you aren't mastering them, you won't have a chance. Part of what you can expect from me will be a focus on the business of making a business when it comes to the content I produce. I'm a business builder. I like seeing people build businesses. But more than anything, I like seeing the progression of an individual into a business person. Forget about a side hustle. Make the industry better than you found it by being better than the other people in the industry. The dot-com millionaires idea. The new top-tier level of collectors, investors, is mostly made up of a couple of different contingencies. First, there are the kids who were growing up in the 70s and 80s that caught the bug in the last great era of baseball cards that appealed to youth buyers. These guys are buying cards of players they only heard about but are close enough to remembering that they can remember that the cards had immense value. They want a piece of their childhood back. They want a piece of what they saw happen as youth. Wealth created by cardboard for those who took it seriously. A second contingent of collectors who are ruling the industry are young, wealthy people, referred to as the dot-com millionaires here, that have access to money that makes it possible for big purchases to be made without a flinch. The money is so great that these purchases can be made often and without difficulty. The rest of the market is made up of ordinary hobbyists that help to fuel the supply for the buyers on all levels. Cards that get passed down from generation to generation, cards that they bought when they were younger, prudent purchase decisions that now need to be liquidated to pay for some expense. These people don't have the 20K plus that's required to make top tier purchases on a regular basis, but they might get a hit or save up for a once in a lifetime purchase. They mostly provide supply to the other hobbyist demands. Guys like Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a 1980s kid who grew up hustling baseball cards to make a few bucks, who have been successful in life and business. He wasn't successful in sports car related business, but he can spend money on cards that most hobbyists can only dream of. Gary V has the potential to essentially corner the market with certain cards and make a killing on shrewd purchases of graded cards of players that everyone wants. I'm not saying that he's trying to or will, but smart money with dumb money bank account figures can make a massive impact on the hobby in the years to come. There are several occasions where guys like Vaynerchuk have made public concepts about purchasing hundreds or thousands of $10,000 plus cards. That kind of purchasing power can demonstrably dictate a third market control variable that can easily fix prices in favor of the holder of the cards. Gary Vaynerchuk himself once stated his desire on a podcast episode to collect Jordan Fleer rookie card stickers in massive quantities because of the value of the player and the availability to the supply, and how he believed that would help to fix the price to make it a can't-lose investment for him. Gary V is now very involved with Topps from a marketing perspective. Maybe this isn't scary to some, but it's something that should be on your radar. I personally like Vaynerchuk, even if he is a bit repetitive about his principles of success. At least he's transparent and he has a work ethic that is enviable. The vast majority of people could learn a lot from him. He's also very practical. Love him or hate him, he's ingrained in the industry now. Again, I respect Gary Vee heavily from a straight talk perspective, but this guy's an absolute marketing genius. He will outthink you from a marketing perspective. So you should get in touch with what he's saying, or expect that guys like him are going to take advantage of guys like you. The makeup of the industry and the modern technology and the preservation techniques make it possible. Junk wax. Did it ever really end? In the sense of unrestrained production volumes within a specific product set, the junk wax era is over. However, in the sense of the product being full of duplicates, lack of attention to detail, and overall volumes from fixed assets by manufacturers, one could make the case that the junk wax era has entered a period of enlightenment. Sure, you aren't getting 22 million Jordan Alvarez cards in a given printing run anymore, but that doesn't mean there aren't plenty of options available within that same printing run. With 10 parallels using the same photograph, you might find millions of available Alvarez cards still. In the sense of pack security, the junk wax era left a lot to be desired, but ever since Upper Deck's foil paper hybrid pack in 1989, the trend has been to move towards tamper-proof packaging. It is all but solved anymore. In the sense of ridiculously large sets with unknown perennial commons, you find a lot less of that too. Most premium set releases feature stars and rookies, all rookies, or a mix of all cards, much smaller than they once were. There is the caveat there that there are legion more set releases each year now, so temper this win for the industry with the knowledge that there are hundreds of millions of additional pieces of cardboard coming out of factories yearly with little pictures of professional players on them. Selling the shovels for the gold rush, or throwing bricks through windows to sell repairs? With the obvious legal concerns and ethical faux pas that have happened in the past few years, think the current trimming scandal, the original trimming scandal from Bill Mastro, Doug Allen, etc., and the conflicts of interest from the PSA camp, among others, it begs the question, what was known and when? More from an investigative perspective, are collectors being manipulated by the very structure of the industry? Forget for a moment that we willingly participate in the buying and selling of hobby materials, and we're active participants in the process. What I want to highlight is the manipulation by companies who produce the very products we ascribe value, whether tangible or intangible, to, which in my opinion violates the very credibility of a standard contract, which the original marketplace, the producer or downline to end user transaction, is governed by. When a company can manipulate for their advantage the core transaction that they are entered in, it makes for a dangerous situation, because they have upset the adequate consideration concept from the basic contract legalities, which makes the original transaction by legal definition unlawful. But the market allows this type of manipulation, and because it goes unchecked, it continues to exist. If the industry were to speak up in a broad movement, the companies who produce product would be regulated heavily by federal or state regulators eventually. This is because consumer rights, and more importantly contract law, is under attack by allowing such a practice to exist. We allow it to exist because we're obsessed with the hobby, the products, the things they denote, and the things that cardboard collectors' items evoke. We don't want the industry to get worse, so we do nothing. However, the industry is at risk from a long-term perspective, and not just from an economic perspective, but from a credibility perspective. While we have already discussed at length some of these concepts which I put under the umbrella of manipulation, here is a list of how these things are done on a regular basis. Pricing controls are in place at the company procurement level, but these pricing controls don't get extended to the products that are being marketed to the public. Fixed costs exist for the production, yet prices continue to rise for all types of products that share those fixed costs. There's only a perceived value limitation at the production level. These are vastly more cards presented each year now through additional sets of different offerings, parallel items, relic and autograph items, and other cards that increase the presence of the player on the market. This solution was introduced in order to combat claims that there was unrestricted production volume in the past. Think in the junk wax era, but it achieves the same concern. Production quality and innovation are at all-time lows thanks to the desire of companies to produce more content rather than more valuable content. Card conditions from factory are generally quite poor, especially for the relic-type cards, as the cards are not packaged or distributed in a way that protects their condition well. Commonplace printing techniques are regarded as innovative card printing techniques, but the companies produce these commodity-level prints at tight industry costs while pumping up value through illegitimate means of marketing. We take the word of production companies that signatures and relics are authentic, but there are dozens of real-life cases where this is proven to be a bad idea with so many scandals occurring. Think Dak Prescott, Luka Doncic, etc. These are simply the things, and not a full exploration or fully inclusive list of them, that the original manufacturers have control over, and which affect the industry unfairly. If one were to factor in the third-party influence wielded by companies like PSA, Beckett, and others, the list of things that are bad for the industry in the sense that they manipulate unfairly the credibility or baseline of the industry, then this list is just the part that shows of the dangerous iceberg that the consumer ship is traveling towards. Break after I run down some 30,000-foot view concepts that need additional exploration. New third-party companies that actually stand behind their review of products and actually make an effort to authenticate and grade relative to other cards on the market need to come online. Scammers need to be shamed or effectively taken out of the hobby so they can't continue to perpetrate the scams on unsuspecting hobbyists. Major League Baseball and the manufacturers of cardboard need to appeal to kids again. Production companies need to recognize the symbiotic relationship that they have with fans and start delivering a better experience and stop prioritizing profits over long-term sustainability. Investment quality cardboard solutions need to come online and challenge and disrupt faulty historical thinking on the subject. Major League Baseball needs to pull their heads out of you-know-where. Wax needs to be recognized for what it is, and equalization needs to occur across the board with breaks. Hits need to be evaluated on true value instead of perceived scarcity. Consumers need to be informed and be unafraid to call companies and marketers out on their deceptions. Yes, I realize this is more a laundry list of things I'd like to see happen, so that you know I actually have solutions based on this laundry list. So stay tuned and see how I envision that we can combat these issues and get long-term corrections in the market. I'm stoked that you stayed this long with me. It takes a lot of trust to stay that long listening to someone ramble on about a topic. But I hope this inspires you to help progress and in the mind trust that exists in a community of collectors and hobbyists that can save the very hobby they're passionate about. So like, subscribe, share, comment, tell me what you think about me and what I got right, and especially what I'm dead wrong about, and let's move forward with the discussion.